Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. How about a bonus upload? Before we jump into it, a couple quick links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads that I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. They definitely do matter, and they are appreciated. With that, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's bonus, shall we? Tonight's first frightening forest experience. Okay, so I've been a skeptic of the creepy paranormal things my entire life. I've really never believed in that type of stuff, but things I have heard and witnessed at my grandparents' farm shakes me to the core. My grandparents own a large plot of land in central Missouri. They've owned that land for around 40 years. I've been to the farm over 10 times, and every time I go, I always get this terrifying feeling that something is watching me. Like there's always something behind my back. I've always had many strange encounters there that are downright bizarre. My first encounter with whatever this thing is, I was around 7 or 9. We had brought our dog, Spot, to the farm. He was a silver lab who I loved dearly. I was exploring in the forest behind the house, just enjoying the summer breeze when my dog starts growling. A deep, sinister growl that I'd never heard him make before. I turned around quickly to see what he was growling at, but I couldn't see anything except the forest. While my eyes were scanning the area where my dog is growling, some sort of animal shot out of the brush so fast I could barely see what it was, and before I knew it, it was gone. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, absolutely flabbergasted by what I had just witnessed. From what I could see of it, it looked like a coyote, but the speed at which it moved was absolutely insane. Just an exaggeration, but it moved like 90 miles an hour and made almost no noise. The most creepy part was that the place it had jumped out of didn't make an imprint of where it was lying, and from where I viewed it jumping up, I should have been able to easily see where it was hiding. Shocked by what I had just witnessed, I decided it was enough, and I headed back to the house. The second encounter happened when I was around 10. I was visiting the place and, like usual, getting that feeling of being watched. The first day was normal, nothing really creepy happened. I was just spending quality time with the family. But when night came, that's when crap started happening. I was trying to sleep in a twin bed that was my mom's brother when he used to live there, when I heard this tapping. Not a tiny little tap, but a loud tap, almost like banging, coming from the direction of the window. I slowly sat up and looked at the window, but there was nothing, so I assumed it was just some animal or something like that. 5 minutes pass and no tapping, so I start to drift off to sleep. Boom! This time not a tap, a slam, a loud slam directly into the window. I'm not talking about like a hit. It sounded as if something absolutely massive had hit the window. I shot up so quickly I nearly passed out. I decided enough is enough and grabbed a flashlight in the drawer and shined it out the window. Nothing. 10 seconds pass, nothing. I was about to go crawl into my mom's bed when I heard it, a screech. A screech that was not achievable by any human, so loud it pierced the quiet, peaceful summer night. I can't put it into words what that sound sounded like, but it was dark and horrible. I still remember it to this day. I froze, unable to move a muscle. I was so scared. I was sitting there, still as a statue, petrified by what I had heard. That's when my instincts kicked in and they told me to run into my mom's room, which I did. For some reason, I didn't wake her up. I just cuddled up next to her and didn't sleep the rest of the night. All I could think of was that sound, that horrible, terrible, bloody screech. The next encounter was when I was around 13. I was back at my grandparents', just enjoying my time like I usually do, when my grandfather suggested that we go watch for deer. I agreed because I'd been doing this since as long as I can remember, and it was never an issue. It was extremely fun. So we take the Polaris and went out at around 6 or 7 p.m. to look for deer. We decide to go into the most eastern pasture because that's where we usually spot the most deer. 30 minutes pass and we had seen a few deer, but not as much as we usually do. This is when things get crazy. I get the feeling again, that dreadful feeling that something's there in the shadows watching me. This time it's a lot more intense. It's right up behind me, but when I look, it's never there. This time it appears that my grandfather feels the same presence as I do. Just to let you know, my grandfather is a very laid-back individual, always joking and laughing. The only time I've ever seen him serious is when my great-uncle died a couple years ago. So when I start feeling that I am being watched, my grandfather goes from happy and laid back to very serious and alert. He gripped the wheel so tight his knuckles turned white and was constantly looking around, making sure something wasn't following us. He makes this massive U-turn out of nowhere and starts heading back to the house. I ask, "What are you doing?" He replies, "We're heading back to the house." The tone of his voice was cold, like he had witnessed someone being murdered. At this point, he's gripping the wheel even harder and absolutely going pedal to the metal full speed back to the house. I decided not to ask any questions until we got back to the house, which we did in no time at all. Once we were there, he rushed me into the house, constantly checking his back to make sure something wasn't there. When we were inside, he closed and locked the door. His behavior was alarming, and it was really shocking me to the core. I decided that all of the stuff I had witnessed was enough, and I only asked him one question: "What's going on here?" When I said that, he looked at me and gave me a cold expression and said, "I have some things I need to explain to you." We sat down for 30 minutes and explained that whatever this thing that was living on his property has been here since the day he moved in, and he and my mother experienced the same thing that was happening to me the first few years of living here. He explained that he was seeing whatever this thing is and that it doesn't like new visitors, hence why I'm experiencing all of these problems. He told me about all of the things that he had witnessed and experienced, and they seemed to have been pretty similar to what was happening to me. He told me that he knew this was going to happen to me, and that he was always watching to make sure I never got hurt, because he knew this creature better than anyone else. We talked some more, but all of it was the same. It was now late, and he decided that I couldn't sleep alone, so he made me sleep with my mom. We luckily promptly left the next morning. I have not been back since that day. Last encounter. This last encounter isn't really an encounter. Two things that have happened at my grandparents' farm. Recently, we brought my sister's horse to their farm. The first night for the horse was hell. My sister's horse has always been very friendly and not shy, but the first night of my sister's horse being at the farm was bizarre. The next morning, my grandfather woke up and was doing his chores and went to go feed the horse, and he noticed that the horse was acting very weird, extremely shy and timid. But when he took a better look, he was shocked. The horse had 3 10-inch gashes down its side, like something had clawed at it. It was ruled out that the horse ran into a fence, but I think otherwise. Also, around the same time, my grandparents adopted a dog named Panda. Panda was a Jack Russell Terrier who was 2 months of age. 5 days later, he was found dead with deep puncture wounds on his body and his neck slashed. They ruled that out as a bobcat or a mountain lion, and I think otherwise. I don't know what this thing is, but something tells me if I go back, good things will not come. Tonight's second frightful forest experience. Mid to late 2000s, I was an avid hiker in the Appalachian Mountains. I had been all up and down the AT. I spent most of my time in Tennessee and Virginia. One day, my main hiking buddy and I were following a main trail when we ran across what looked like a game trail. Being curious dumbasses, we decided to follow it. Very quickly, we started hearing very odd sounds. It was humming like electricity. We got closer and found a clearing with a large, old, dilapidated barn in the middle of nowhere, not even close to a road. And we found that the hum was from thousands of mud daubers that had nested in a dirt mound that was the foundation of this barn. Obviously, we were very careful not to disturb them. But we made our way back to the side of the barn and found another trail. It led to a cabin, a small wooden shelter with 4 bunks, built by the Boy Scouts in the 30s according to a plaque on the door. We thought this would be an awesome place to camp and left shortly thereafter with the intention of bringing back other friends. A few weeks later, we took 2 of our friends up to this place, so 4 of us total. We knew we had shelter, so we didn't bring a tent or anything, just sleeping bags and a lot of food. Oh, and LSD. We all dropped when we got into the cabin, and then we set up making our beds and building a fire to make dinner. Now mind you, this cabin is in a small clearing, maybe the size of a football field, and there is only one trail. Let's call it from the west to make things easier. It's several hours after we got there and set up. We're all tripping a bit, beers are flowing, weeds blowing. When the 4 of us sitting around the fire all stop because we hear something coming from the north. Mind you, no trail, just lots of brush. Stuff is nearly impossible to walk through. As we sit staring, an old man, probably 60s, white ponytail and all, comes out of the brush with his 2 big metal walking sticks. We flipped out. All 4 of us immediately pulled our knives and prepared to defend ourselves. Old guy put his hands up and said, "Easy, boys. I just saw your fire and was wondering if I could share it for a bit." We calmed down and allowed him to warm himself. It was fairly chilly spring night, and at least midnight by this point. He sat by the fire, we offered him food, and he accepted. He then proceeded to tell us stories about the area. Like, he told us about the people who had owned the wasp barn nearby 100 years ago and stuff. After he ate and warmed himself, maybe an hour and a half, he got up and grabbed his walking sticks and said, "Thank you, boys, gotta go." And he walked straight south, like in a straight line from where he came. But once again, there was no trail there. The next morning, we went looking both to the north and south and couldn't find a single trace of this guy. I know what you're going to say, and yes, we were high as kites, but we all 4 met and talked to the man, and we all 4 woke up the next day curious and went looking. None of us could find a single trace of his existence. What really messed with us was, as we made our way home back out of the trail to the west and then north, we saw him again, sitting on a log in the middle of a stream a good way off the trail and down the ridge. In the opposite direction that he had walked off, we waved, he waved back. And as soon as we went around the corner of the trail, the 4 of us sprinted as fast as we could, like 2 miles back to the car. We haven't been camping or hiking since. Today's third frightful forest experience. I was hunting for black bear one day back in the early 2000s. The area I was hunting was northern Clinton County, PA. My ex-brother-in-law and I enjoyed the area and spent many seasons scouting and hunting the land. This part of the county is filled with long hollows, steep inclines, and hard-to-access trails. We both like to do our own thing and hunt separate terrain. I would often dive down into the hollows while he scoured the ridgelines, hoping to get a shot at whatever I pushed up to the top. We both carried pretty bumped up two-way radios to keep on general idea of where we were, although often the terrain made it too difficult for good reception. This day was a typical PA bear season day. It was on a Wednesday of the season, the third and last day of a brief season. It was back then. The woods were quiet with no distant whooping or yodeling of various opening day camps pushing drives through the woods. The weather was cold, gray, and windy when we separated to begin our hunt and continued on throughout the day. I spent the day still hunting down this long hollow south of the little town in north central Clinton County, with the idea of meeting my brother-in-law at the top of the ridge at the agreed time of 4 p.m., giving us plenty of time to hike together a few miles back to his truck. After hunting all day, I found an old game trail that appeared to meander its way back up to the ridgeline towards where I knew he would be waiting for me. After close to an hour, maybe around 3:30, I made my way 2/3 of the way to the top, stopping often, scouring the slope for the jet black fur of a roaming bear. Along the trail, I came upon a long ago used fire ring. It was very rudimentary in its build and appeared to be used only once. The ring's rocks were covered in lichen and only had the faintest traces of black from a long ago fire. I found it odd that a fire ring would be here considering the steepness of the slope, but it was a very small, somewhat leveled ledge. There I figured I would sit and eat the rest of my packed food and sit still, hoping to catch a final chance to see a bear. All the while, it felt odd, somewhat unwelcoming, like I shouldn't be there. Almost felt like I was forbidden interloper on someone's valued spot. I sat for maybe 20 minutes and thought that it was time to continue the trek upward towards my bud. As I stood, I slung my backpack on and reached down to sling my rifle over my left shoulder. I stood up. I heard my name called loudly. It didn't really sound like it was behind me, rather than all around in my head. Just as I was going to turn around, my rifle was slapped off of my shoulder. I felt the force, heard the sound of something slap against the wood of the stock, and crouched quickly to save my gun from dashing into the rocks at my feet. I grabbed it in the nick of time and quickly turned around with a mouthful of mother effers for whom I thought was going to be my brother-in-law jacking around with me. There was nobody there at all. Absolutely no way could anyone have rushed off without me either seeing or hearing them. I felt sick. My stomach was churning, chills throughout my body. Muttered a few Hail Marys and sped up to the top of the ridge, met my bud, and quietly we hiked our way out of the woods to his truck in the spreading dark of the evening. This has bothered me for years, and I have not been able to go back to those woods since. Maybe one day, I hope to. Tonight's fourth frightening forest experience. I've been backpacking and camping mostly solo as an adult for the majority of my life. I'm cautious about my surroundings, and I listen carefully when I'm out. I try to remain an observer and move through the land with little impact. I'm also very interested in the mysterious and obscure, cryptids, alternative realities, the unexplained. I've read the most missing persons cases, and I am a curious devotee of true crime, all of the morbid and curious things I can find. anything strange that will fire the imagination. There have been occasions where I have felt slightly uncomfortable, or watched even, when I've been out in the woods, but mostly I've chalked it up to being alone and alert. Maybe my inherent skepticism makes me less susceptible to encounters which others experience. I look for logical conclusions first. I've never encountered any truly off or deranged people out in the forest, but I do consider that the biggest threat, the human animal. A few years ago, I set out to camp near an old-growth forest in North Georgia. Most old growth here is gone, but there are places that haven't been logged, and if you get a chance to visit one, wherever you may live, I'd suggest it's beautiful, serene, alive in a way that's hard to describe. This particular forest was one of hemlock and poplar, and the trees were massive. I had a guidebook that gave directions out into the sticks, following little country roads that eventually turned into gravel. After a long drive into the national forest, I parked near the trail, which was unmaintained, meaning it was not very popular or heavily traveled. I hiked out through the woods to where the trail just eventually kind of stopped. There was very little undergrowth. I spent the afternoon just exploring, looking at the trees and enjoying the calmness. I eventually made my way down to a creek and crossed over it to an old field that formed sort of a bowl in the land with hills and ridges on all the sides. The fact that there was a field means that there had to, I guess, at one point been people living in the area, but I saw nothing of the sort when I was there, and my maps showed that I should have been far enough from any roads or settlements. I set up my tent and made some food. It was late when I decided to have a little smoke and lie out in the field in front of my tent and look at the stars before bed. There was little to no light pollution, and I always relished the opportunity to enjoy the sky at those times. As I lie there, I begin hearing loud knocking sound from up near the ridge where I had been earlier in the day, maybe 1,000 yards away. 3 knocks and a long pause followed by 3 more, and then it'd repeat. When I say knocks, what I mean is very loud noises like 2 logs or trees being hit together, loud enough to reverberate in that little bowl I was in, loud enough you could almost feel it. I could pinpoint where the sound was coming from, but it was night in the forest, and anyone who had been out there knows that that's dark. I thought it had to have been a person making the noise, because what else would make such a rhythmic sound? It was extremely loud and would have taken considerable effort to produce. I'd seen no one else at all during the day, and the direction from which the sound came was the section of old growth I had explored earlier. And that's it. Eventually the sound stopped. I went to bed, feeling like I had heard something I was not meant to hear, or maybe that I had heard something specifically meant for me and me alone to hear. I packed up and hiked out the next day. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't hyper-aware and waiting for something else to happen, but nothing did. I've told friends about this, and they'll all either say that they think it was a Sasquatch or someone messing around in the woods. But why would a person be out in the woods late at night banging 2 logs together in the dark? Tonight's final frightening forest experience. Let me start off by saying that this is 100% true. It happened to me when I was about 13. I'm 27 years old now. Whether you believe this or not is up to you. My dad used to be a part of a small hunting club in Alabama, just a handful of guys that he had grown up with. Once a year, we would drive to a small town of Alba to camp for a few days and go hunting. There were a few different areas of land around the town that the club owned, and club members would go hunt there. One of those pieces of land was nicknamed the cemetery because, well, it had an old cemetery on it. Nothing really creepy about the cemetery. It was in the woods, in the graves, were of slave owner and graves of his slaves. Now, in this area of the land nicknamed the cemetery, there are 5 or 6 green fields, basically a cleared out area where there were no trees, just grass and a buck hunt to hunt in. A buck hunt is a tree house that you sit in and wait for deer to walk out into the green field. This particular evening, we were going to hunt the green field 1, a plot directly behind the old cemetery. The evening started off normal enough. My dad parked the truck. We walked down the trail to the buck hut. We climbed up and started to wait and watch the woods. A little bit of time passes, and my dad tells me that he's going to go for a short walk and see if he maybe sees any deer on the trail. Keep in mind, I'm about 13 years old now. Not a big deal. I've hunted by myself before, and I'm not afraid of being alone in the woods. Besides, it's still pretty light out. I say okay, and he climbs down. It's just me with my .32 caliber Marlin rifle, the green field in front of me, and the dense woods around me. This is where things start to get strange. I sat there for an eternity, or what felt like an eternity. It was now almost twilight. My concern for my dad is growing because he's still not back yet. I was worried that maybe something had happened to him or he had gotten lost. However, he's an experienced hunter, and if he was lost, he would yell or fire off a shot, but the woods were dead silent. I figured maybe he found a good spot that he wanted to hunt at twilight/dusk hour of the day because that's prime time for hunting. So I focused my attention on the grass field in front of me, just watching, listening, waiting for deer to walk out into the field as the light of the day begins to fade. Just then across the field I saw and heard some brush moving and breaking. The thought did cross my mind that it could have been my dad, but I highly doubted it. No way could that have been him. That would be incredibly dangerous and stupid. I raised my rifle and pulled back the hammer, aimed it, and at the moving brush, and patiently waited for what I hoped was a deer to walk out. Then a girl floated out of the woods and onto the grassy field. She was transparent white, with a long flowing dress and long white hair. She floated from one side of the field to the other and disappeared back into the woods. I watched her for a solid minute or two. I couldn't believe my eyes. I was petrified. Now I wanted my dad back. A short time passes. Now it's pitch black. I'm still alone. My concern for my dad has turned into panic, but I'm too afraid to yell or go look for him in the pitch black woods, where I had just seen a ghost. I sat there for hours, terrified, alone in the darkness. Thankfully, he finally returned. He acted as if he had not been gone long. I asked where he had went to, and he just said he went for a short walk up the trail, turned around and came back. The timeline made no sense. He had been gone for hours. It was unlike him to leave me alone for that long. He was adamant he had only been gone 10 or 15 minutes. We walked down the trail to his truck. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. The whole experience still confuses me to this day. Was the ghost I saw an old slave or a slave owner buried in the woods behind me something else entirely? Did my dad go through some kind of time warp where time sped up? I don't know. I never went hunting there again and don't plan to ever go back.
And there you have it, folks. I hope you all enjoyed today's bonus as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you, and I'd like to thank you for supporting the channel. It is, after all, your support that helps this channel to continue to grow and go, and what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free. Everyone is simply treated with the respect that we deserve. Please, everyone, stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and our friends. These creatures are real. They are out there and dangerous. These events have happened. Share it with the people that you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless.